One of the things we're going to talk about today is one of the most misunderstood concepts when we're trying to recover from infidelity. And this concept is one of really what is emotional abuse? And when do we know it's present? And when is it just a trauma response, just acting out of our best character or what could be our best character? And when do we really need to get help? Today, I want to shed some light on this topic wherever you may be. If it's your own relationship and how you're having to navigate what you're dealing with, or maybe someone close to you. I can promise if you've ever made it through to the other side of recovery, the early aftermath, that first year, it's really, really difficult to say the least. I mean, the Wild Wild West and some of those shows, they don't even come close to even representing how primitive our responses and our emotions can get in the wake and the blow of navigating the information that we have to digest and disclose. We've said it before, but if you need a reminder, the appropriate human emotional response when discovering betrayal is going to be a rage and anger and a violation of the deepest kind. But as you can see, that can get really murky because our responses, we need to distinguish, right? What is a response from our humanity? And then when do we cross the line into what we would call emotional abuse? We say here at A Fair Recovery that it's going to take anywhere from 18 months to even up to 2 to 3 years to fully make significant progress and recover. It can get really messy in the meantime, though, of how we interact and how we respond to the pain. And I want to say all of us, I think every human being, we have found ourselves in situations that, as I described today, what we would consider emotional abuse, we've probably all identified and we've responded in that way, either as an initiation or a response to our own pain. We still, though, want to draw a line between what's okay and what's not okay, because we all want to evolve and we want to be people that act in a loving and mature manner and not just a reaction to pain. Our relationships are going to be better for it. And so today I'm going to get really practical. We're going to just talk about what constitutes as emotionally abusive behaviors. So as we start this conversation, I think it's important we say this applies to both men and women. Both men and women can act in this way to cope, and both unfaithful and betrayed can initiate a response with these behaviors. Most often we see the unfaithful have used a lot of these behaviors in their acting out to keep it going, right? There's the old saying that for an addict, anything they put in front of their recovery, they're going to lose. And so I know this might stir up what's been done in the past. And then in light of the pain, sometimes we see these behaviors can really start to take shape as a response to the pain without the right help. All of them are contrary, though, to acting again into our best self. So we know it's imperative to say that as we go through these behaviors, this applies to both men and women, and it applies to both the unfaithful and the betrayed. Many times for the unfaithful, you might notice this is how you have acted out. This is how you kept what you were doing a secret, by using some of these, what we would even call abusive behaviors emotionally. And then a lot of times we'll see if betrayed don't get through their trauma, this can be a response to their pain. All of these are all going to be still contrary to acting in our most mature self. They're not going to be loving. Our relationships won't thrive if we use these behaviors. And if you're like me, we grew up knowing, understanding what physical abuse is. But emotional abuse can be really difficult to detect. It can be, minor to severe. So we're just going to get really practical today, and we're going to go through what some of the most common forms of it are. And the first one we're going to talk about is just the idea of belittling. Have you ever been subject to someone belittling you, or have you ever taken the position of belittling your mate? This is a form of contempt where you really start to see your person as someone that's beneath you. You look at them with contempt and sometimes disgust. This can be with your words, this can be with your actions, and most often it can even be with an attitude towards them that says, be little. It's an extreme form of pride that, going unchecked, it can really do some damage because it says all the time, I'm better than you. We are not equals. And I am going to take on this attitude towards you. This is emotionally abusive and destructive. So chances are, if you've ever really felt extremely inferior, stupid, shamed, maybe really childlike, over and over and over again, notice these are patterns, by someone that feels they're superior to you, that's belittling. If you've ever heard the phrase over and over of, how could you be so stupid? This is abusive. This is harmful. That message has been sent. And if you're doing that, can you start to consider we're all human? No matter what's happened, are we created equally? Another form of emotional harm, destruction, and abuse we'll see is the idea of control or being controlling. And this one's tricky because I think for all of us, we have to ask the question of, what did we see growing up? What happened in our families? Because if we came from where we saw someone always exert control, we're not going to notice it as much. It's going to be pretty familiar to us. But in its purest form, control still is objectification. It's still dehumanizing. It's treating someone as if they're incapable of any free will, any decision-making, any rights to kind of their own autonomy. And if someone is controlling, what it's doing, it's a cover-up of their insecurity, their jealousy, their extreme anxiety about their time, their possessions, their relationships. And you're usually going to see control if, for example, one mate has absolute and complete control with all of the finances. Or maybe you have one mate that's constantly checking up on the other, just maybe sometimes to give input as to what's going on with their life, even with their friendships. And you typically know you're in a relationship where control is an issue when you start to fear the fallout or repercussion of what's going to happen if you speak or act in a way that your mate isn't going to like. Another idea that's always contrary to love that is emotionally abusive is just constant criticism or put downs. It's imperative that we use the word constant, that this is a pattern, because I do think all of us, we can tend to be really critical when we're under stress. I know when I feel underappreciated and I'm struggling to set the boundaries that I need to set in my life that would protect me so I don't feel so kind of used up and burned out, the first thing I'm going to do is get really critical. There's a part of this, I do think it's human nature. But again, this idea of putting down, you're smaller than me, we're not the same. This is a put down, this is a criticism. This is an idea of I am going to not only see your flaw or your flaws, but I'm going to point them out. And this is not okay in our closest relationships. Excessive blaming. This is another place where relationships can go off the rails, and without going unchecked, we're going to go ahead and label it as emotionally abusive. Because have you ever noticed or been around someone that is always a victim, that nothing is ever their fault. I mean, first of all, this isn't only predictable, but it's pretty exhausting because you're going to see one person that always is blaming their mate for everything. And it can be even as simple as, the dog ran away. It's your fault. The dinner gets burned. It's your fault. Many just basic life events, someone that's using this form of behavior, they'll trace it back to their mate as they were supposed to be more competent. And so excessive blaming, right? What they've actually done, this person, is we're making the other mate too big. They're too important. They're too responsible. And if you're on the receiving end of what you feel is excessive blaming, here's where you need to maybe take heart. Really adopting the attitude that I don't want to be anybody's solution and I can't. I'm not going to be anybody's biggest problem. Not everything can be your fault. One area of destruction we see a lot in the recovery of infidelity, especially in the immediate aftermath, is the idea of name calling. And I think for all of us, it's so tempting. It's a lack of self-control and regulation where we want to just call the one that's hurt us a name. And this is going to imply to them, we're reducing someone when we call them a name to this one object at one time. And it's really just our feelings that we're trying to name. And we can't always name when we name call. But here's where it damages us. Name calling, it not only hurts the person you're labeling, but the real danger is actually hurting you because, when I call someone a name, if I call you a name, what I've done in that moment is I've reduced everything that's happening to one oversimplification in that moment. And the damage I'm doing is I promise the name I call you, you will not forget. And you can think about it, right? How many times even have we muttered and thought about it? And we all know what those names typically are. For women, right? We want to reduce them to this word or this idea. Usually it rhymes with stitch. And men, so many times in our extreme emotional response, we want to reduce them. Most often that I see is, the idea of, starts with an A, what we might need a shovel to dig up dirt with. And we want to just flat out use name calling as a way to almost kind of put a halt and stop the pain we're feeling or the pain that we're hearing. But we don't want to do this. It's again our feelings, and our feelings aren't always truth. Again, I don't know the credit of who we need to give for this quote about feelings, but it's one of my favorites. And it's this idea that feelings are like kids in the car. We don't want to really let them drive, and we also can't stuff them in the trunk. So we don't want to name or reduce ourselves to name calling. It's not loving. It's just the way we're trying to protect ourselves and get out of pain. We're going to wrap up, but what we're going to end today with are really some of the more severe forms of what we would call emotionally abusive behaviors. And if this is you, I'm going to give you some practical ways that you need to get help. Because here at A Fair Recovery, we are committed to healing, we're committed to growth, and we're committed to safety at all costs. But the last ones I'm going to go over are coercing and threatening. And these are ways that someone uses manipulation to get what they want. Sometimes threats. They can be subtle or not so subtle. But it's again a domination in a really destructive way and immature way to control others to get our needs met. Have you ever noticed it's just much more efficient to ask someone for what we need rather than to use this form of control? And you're experiencing someone who's using coercion when you start to maybe sense you've lost something. You don't feel like you have a right to your own time, body, or experiences. And you're in the midst of threats when you've ever heard the words, if you leave me, I'm going to do this. Or if you don't do this, I will do this. Again, this is a form of behavior that we don't want. We want to learn to be able to ask for our needs. Withholding and abandoning. These are also forms of protection we use that outright can give this message, which is a deliberate refusal to communicate. This is really, really harmful. And notice the word deliberate. It's, I'm almost going to look at you as if you deserve. I can't stand this. I'm going to pull away and never come back. This is very different from a timeout when we just need to regulate because we're saying we'll come back. And it's very different from a trauma response when we just shut down because we can't process fast enough. Withholding and abandoning, again, it's this extreme version of pride that says, you don't deserve my presence, my time, or my words. And we don't ever want to do that to our mate. So with all forms that I've gone over today, it's just a heavy topic, but it's a way that we ultimately want to encourage you so that you can start to identify, what behaviors maybe am I exhibiting that I need to work on, or what might I be in the midst of that I need help, walking with a trusted counselor or small groups so you can navigate and start to name and validate what's happening in your relationship, even in the midst of your recovery. One of the best things you can do, I can't say enough, is just find groups, find safe people that are also committed towards healing. We have a lot of groups here at A Fair Recovery. If you've taken them, we encourage you to maybe consider leading them. And if you've never stepped into one, we have our Harboring Hope course, our Hope for Healing, and our EMS weekends, because the greatest power that we can have to grow sometimes is in the form of letting others load share and carry group support, especially if emotional abuse is present. Thank you, and until next time.